Mhm. All right. We good? All right. Well, thanks for coming out for the Keys software training. We're going to go through basic routing, um, what this thing is, kind of how they do things at Greenfield, and go through the startup setup. So if you would come and sit at this and nothing's like open, this is basic training on how to open Ableton, connect it to Reason, and all that kind of good stuff. So let's get started. This is an audio interface. This thing right here, it's off right now. This is what we have at all our campuses except for Greenfield now. So this will apply to if Greenfield people go to another campus, or you are at Lidditz, so this will apply to you. So if you walk in and stuff's just not on yet, it's good for you to know, especially if you have to shut things down and turn it back on. You kind of know the procedure of doing all that. So these audio interfaces, after you are done with them, should be, once all the programs are shut down, you need to turn them off. And then when you come in, if it's not on, turn this on first and then go into your programs. So we're just going to walk through that real quickly. And the power button is right here. The switch, I guess. You could call that right there. So we're just going to, this isn't hooked up, but we're just going to, act like it is hooked up. So that's on. It kind of blinks. And good to go. Takes a second or so. So make sure that is on. And then going to the computer, if it just has Finder, you go down to the bottom. And this is key because we're essentially slaving one program into the other. It's called Rewire. Ableton Live is what we use for our backing tracks, and now for all effects that are on your Keys sounds. So you just want to just click it, it'll open up. Oh. I will, yes. So that'll be within when I'm opening, and just a prefix and explanation. So in Ableton, it'll show up like this. This is obviously the wrong place you want to be. You want to go to File. And more than likely, if you go to Open Recent, there's the one that is on there that Greenfield would be using. Or you can just go to Open Live. And depending on where your campus director is housing the template or the reoccurring set, just open that here. It's probably beneficial to have it on the desktop in a folder that says Ableton Live template or something like that. So you want to just go and click it and then press open, and it'll get you to this screen right here. And for the purposes of today, all this stuff right here is for tracks, backing tracks for Sundays and special events and all that stuff. So we're going to mainly focus on this new tab now called Keys. And when you press the arrow, it opens up and it has all these routing stuff that we will go through in a moment. So next, when you're at this point, you want to come down to Reason. So this is key. You want to open Ableton first, and then Reason. And that will tell Reason, You want to just log in. Make sure you're having your username and password saved. Just because it's ease of use for your keys players. If you have to restart really quickly, they can get it into it instead of getting there and typing and all that kind of stuff. So make sure that's all saved. And it'll open up. So Propellerhead is the maker of Reason, and they came up with something that it's called Rewire. So when you have a DAW, which is a like recording software, that kind of thing, if you have one of those open, and then you open Reason automatically rewires with that, so it's a slave. So whatever routing you have in this is going to get a little over some people's heads, but this is the main program. We're sending information from this program to Reason, and then pulling the sound back to Ableton. So we'll explain a lot of that kind of thing. So that's the like super basic of what is happening in what's going on here. So all your instruments are in here. Once this is open, you want to go back to Ableton. You don't want to touch anything in here. We're just going to, if you do a Command Tab, it just kind of brings you right back to Ableton, and then we can start going through all this stuff. So again, the keys, and let's actually look at, if you go to Live Preferences, this is where you're going to connect to your audio interface, so still with the startup process. If you go to Preferences and go to the Audio tab here, it's the second one. And you want to look at the audio output device. Right now, Greenfield just updated to what's called a Dante virtual sound card. It's a virtual audio interface, and that's here just at Greenfield. Everything else you will be looking at, this is called the Scarlett. Where is it's the Focusrite Scarlett 18i20 or something like that. So when you click on this drop-down menu, it would be under here. So the Scarlett is right there, 18i20. For today's purposes, we're going to select this one. So we can select this one so you kind of, when you select it, it connects to it. And you want to make sure all these are checked. Again, we're not using this today, but at another campus, we would want to make sure all of our outputs on the audio interface are highlighted, and that's going to tell Ableton that it can use those slots. Again, this is, very basic. This is being recorded. You can go back at this at any time to kind of review some of this stuff.
And Mark, just as a point of reference too, most of this will already be done. This is if you were starting up from completely scratch. When you open it up in a normal situation, you open up Ableton, then Reason, all this stuff should be already highlighted and done. It's only if you're not getting sound and there's nothing coming out that these are the things that you would need to
You would check that. So yeah, if you were not getting sound out of this thing, that's one thing you would check. See, this is already checked because we already set this up. And all these are highlighted anyway, so you don't have to worry about anything else in there, and we are going to close that out. So that is a simple startup. You are ready to go. Everything is mapped because we all have the same keyboards. We're all using the same templates. So everything should just sync up. Obviously, technology has some glitches, and we'll work through that. So let's just go through all of the little tabs here. So keys MIDI in. Again, you don't have to touch anything with this, but just a brief explanation. This is where the MIDI, so a MIDI note is just what's coming from this keyboard. It's just like a virtual kind of note. It doesn't have any, this keyboard doesn't produce any sound on its own. It just sends something called a MIDI signal or a MIDI note. And this is capturing those notes. So from the MIDI in, it says MIDI from, and we selected our keyboard. And on this, we have two things. Keys MIDI in, this velocity. So basically, if for some reason we would have a keyboard die and we need to replace the keyboard quickly on a Sunday, and you're playing it and it's just like, I gotta hit this thing super hard to get anything out of it, you can actually, on the drive function here, this will pull up the attack of your keyboard. So it'll, like virtually, so it sends the signal and it goes through this and it actually raises how much attack you're actually processing. So this will ease of use. So if you have a keyboard that you would put in and it has a lot of attack and you're just like, I'm barely hitting this thing, but it's like screaming loud, or it's like super chimey, but I'm trying to play soft, you just pull the drive down and then it'll soften it up and make it so you can have a good feel even though you're swapping keyboards in and out, if that ever happens. And also, if we would replace these keyboards, because not all keyboards are made the same with velocity and all that stuff. And velocity is basically how hard you're hitting the key. So you can hit it softly or hard. So if you look at this little bar right here, if I hit it, see, it only goes about halfway. If I hit it hard, it hits the top. So it's sensing how much velocity you're putting on the key, and that's how all the software responds with the sounds and all that. This next one is a octave function. It's basically if you want to play in octaves, like a lead line that's octave, but you're not so good at doing the octave reach, you can just hit this pad right here. It's labeled octave. If you hit it, you can watch it turn on, and then you could play that. So we'll demonstrate that in a few minutes here. So we'll turn that back off. Pads MIDI in is capturing the same MIDI. So the reason we're splitting them is because I don't want the octave function on the pad, because when you start doing octaves and pads, it can get a little wonky. So that one just still has the same velocity. So whatever value you would put in here, if you had to change this, right now these keyboards work perfectly just straight up on 0. But if you ever to change this, just remember to change on both. Kick is for what's called a sidechain effect. So it's sending a musical note to a compressor to make the pulsing sound. So that's on. There's a knob here. It's labeled sidechain, and that's where this MIDI clip here, these beats, these MIDI notes are hitting this software instrument, and I'm sending that signal to a compressor. Again, basic. We can go in depth and all that kind of stuff, but I just want to keep this basic. So basically, if there's these clips on tracks, you can use the sidechain. If it's not, like, see, if we're doing, it says tremble here and there's no, this knob won't do anything because there's nothing being sent to that device to make it pulse. That zzz, 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 zzz. It's more for kind of like higher energy songs and that kind of thing. So like Look to the Sun is an example. All you would do, for worship leaders, you would just copy and paste that into where you would want, and that will automatically make that option available to your keys players. So MIDI comes from this. So it's just capturing MIDI notes, and it's sending it to now these yellow tabs. So this is where the routing starts coming in. So piano, this can get super big, but I'll kind of easy use. I'll expand them a little more. From the MIDI in, piano is pulling from this MIDI note from the keyboard into keys MIDI in. It's now being routed to this piano tab. And in here, this is all the stuff that's on this tab. This external instrument, now this is where it's sending it to Reason. So see how it's grayed out. If we can switch the camera angle to the keyboard now, there's a button right here. So we used to be doing main stage, and you would just have to do a fader to get your sound. Before you get any sound, you have to hit the button, and it lights up to a red. Now, if you look at Ableton, it's engaged, it's brightened up. If I hit it off, it kind of grays everything out. I hit it again, it's now on, and then you can use the piano. pull that reverb out. There's a slight reverb to this. There's a very slight reverb in Reason to just, if it's not completely dry, but the reverb that's in here, we'll explain that, will be useful later. So for each of these, now yellow tabs is an instrument. So what's happening, just a brief explanation, if I turn this on, it's sending the MIDI to Reason. It's coming in here, hitting the software instrument, and Reason is sending the audio to Ableton, back to Ableton, and then we can affect it with our effects and stuff like that. Better? Cool. So, does that make sense for everyone? So it's again, rewatch this to kind of get a better explanation. Again, it's going to take some time to again really, if you haven't worked with MIDI, it can be kind of confusing at first, but just keep rewatching it, keep kind of learning about it, and then you'll get a good grasp. So every yellow tab is a different instrument. We have a piano, an electric piano, pad 1, which is like a buzzy pad. It can get real bright. Pad 2 is a more mellow pad. It doesn't get as bright and is a little more lower end. And then our synth lead sound. And for right now, that's all our instruments. And then we have a master fader, which controls the overall sound. So the faders are moving. If you can see right here, the piano is going up and down. That is where the fader is affecting this audio. So every one of these is just, if you go, there is an organ one, but that's not totally hooked up yet. So synth, pad 2, pad 1, just it's the same labels as on your keyboard to here. And you can, if I just scroll over, you can see there's just an external instrument on every single one. And from that, so when it's pulling the audio out, it's going to these buses. And this is where all your effects come from. So just go from the piano. We'll turn it on. Here we go. So we just have a regular old piano. And if I want to change the tone, is this filter. So if we're feeling like that's a little too chimey for maybe this altar, you can pull like an altar song, or even when pastor's speaking, you can pull it down. You can see this is moving in real time. It only goes that far because I don't want. You could probably pull that up and we can change that, but I don't necessarily want us to go the whole way down and then you have no sound. So there's going to be an end point. I'll probably actually switch it to here, so you can kind of tell as it's filtering out all the high end, and it's pulling it all out. So if I turn it down, if I want it a little more mellower. If I want chimey. So that will change how the sound of the piano. So you can get a lot of variations of sounds. If you're going to a quiet moment, I recommend pulling it down, because even sometimes if you're playing soft, it still has a lot of high end to it. If you want that, that's fine. But if you really want to mellow it out, you just kind of pull that out a little bit. It just takes the top off and is a really nice effect. So these next three here, they're all grayed out, are your delay options for your piano. One is a dotted eighth note, which is all in these top pads here. The computer's kind of, there they are. So right there, and they're all labeled with the musical note. So a dotted eighth delay and this all syncs off of the tempo in Ableton, so you don't have to tap tempo anymore or anything. It automatically switches it all. So your dotted eighth and also these two here are linked to all the dry and wet. So dry means your original signal, and wet means the effect, like how much effect you want, like you're mixing how much wet. So if you would go the whole way on your mix, that's 100% delay, like delayed single. So if I hit it, see how I hit it and then it comes, so there's no original signal there. So if I pull it down, but if I would pull it up just a bit, you probably don't even need to go past 10 o'clock on this thing, because it can get, there's a lot to go with this. And then the next one is the delay feedback. How many repeats do you want in your delay is kind of that layman's term for feedback. So if I just kind of strike it, you can kind of hear that. I'll pull it up a little bit more. You can hear the delay, and then you can obviously, if you would go 100% feedback, it would delay for a very long time. So we don't want that. So again, like if you just want one, you can kind of play around and know kind of where. So see how it kind of trails off. That second one was kind of low, so that's a good, like, just if you wanted just a quick kind of another chord of the delay is good. Probably about, again, almost 10 o'clock is probably the max you want to really go for all that. So we have the dotted eighth note. So you hit the pad, it turns it on. You hit the pad, it turns it off. I recommend when you're sitting at this to have this keys bus highlighted so you can see which delays are on. The thing about this keyboard is if you see I press this one, if I press and hold, it turns it on and the pad turns red. But if I undo the pad, it goes back to green, but the delay's still on. So it's kind of the thing with this keyboard, there's not an on-off light for these delays. So this is the thing that can sometimes easily, you can forget, oh, which delay am I on? And you're trying to mess with it and try to get back to where you want to be. So I tell all my keys players, just have this up because these three delays can easily, like, you can have all three on by accident and start playing, and then you're super washy at that point. So the dotted eighth note, and quarter note. So dotted eighth for your kind of faster stuff. Quarter note definitely for the slower and even eighth note, depending on the taste or what you're trying to go for. And then the last one is reverb, and these are all in the filter. And when you put them in this order, they're being affected in that order. So if you would put this auto filter on this side, you would be filtering all the dry and wet at the same time. So what's happening is when the audio is coming in, it's being filtered first, then it's being delayed, and then you're reverbing the delay and filtered signal. Does that make sense? There's a progression. If we went reverb, delay, filter, we would put reverb on our signal, then delay the dry and wet of that reverb, and then filter. So for clarity of our rooms, this is the best possible. You can switch it up in like a studio to get a cool sound or that kind of thing, but just for live use, this is as you'll get the most clarity out of this this progression of effects. So for reverb, the only thing we affect, this knob says piano verb right here. This controls the dry wet thing right here. So I'm moving it and it's moving. So that's the only thing that moves on here is the dry wet. And this is just set to your dry wet. So the more you put on, the bigger your reverb gets. So playing it. But I pull some reverb. can kind of hear the trail. If you put more reverb, it's pulling the dry out and putting more reverb in. You can hear it really, it's kind of a modulated reverb as well. So because we're using pad a lot of times, there's probably, you don't want to go not even really past 9 unless you're really looking for that kind of sound for your piano. If you're going past 9, and you're having pad and all that stuff, it can get very muddy. So I would say 9 o'clock is almost max. Again, if you're looking for a specific sound, they go a little bit more than that. And that is the piano. Again, so the octave function is on that keys MIDI in. So I'm turning it on and off. So just an example is the Peace Be Still we've been doing is when. So if people aren't really good with, like me, if I'm playing this song, I will literally fat finger that whole thing. So I'm not even going to attempt to do it. I'll just turn the octave on. So you can get that octave sound with ease of use for your keyboard. So it just tailors to, you know, the skill levels of our musicians. It's a great kind of thing. Just remember when it's on and when it's off. You'll easily be able to hear that if you're playing. It just puts more of like a chime on it. Kind of thing. So that is the octave function. So that's piano, and then it just gets sent out to the output for the keys routing. Organ we're not going to go over. So pad has a couple more things. Actually, there's two of that. So some EQs we can actually, let's just turn these off for now. That's just to kind of shape the sound so it's not too low end. For this one, I wanted, so you see it's the reverb, then the filter. That's on purpose because we want to make sure it just sounds better filtering actually the reverb on pads. So if we go to pad 1, which is right here, and we turn that up, or you can, swell in. You can get a lot of low end on this one. This right here, your mod wheel, is your filter. Again, you can see it goes only so far, so you're not trying to hit a spot all the time. You can just pull it down, and that's your mellowest. Again, tailor it slightly to, again, your campus and your acoustic, the feel of it. Your tech directors will help you with that as well. So then for the reverb is the next knob over from the piano verb. It's all labeled. So it's still affecting the dry wet right here. You can see it moving. So I'll just kind of hold this out. Just making it a little more like modulated a little bit. It'll attack a lot slower the more verb you put on it. So if you can tell if this is, but then you put a lot on, and I play that. It's very washy, so it's not. If you're looking for a faster attack, you don't want a ton of reverb because it'll actually, you won't hear the chord transition. So the next for the pad, and this is pad 2. Just a little more mellower. That's as bright as it gets. just a more of a mellower pad for that. And then here's the next is the compressor. So this is where the side chain comes in, the pulsing. Again, you need to have this right there is a MIDI clip that has like a drum beat. So if we just play that, go back to the pad bus, you can see now the compressor is working. So it's getting an audio signal from the kick that, because a lot of times in fast kind of moving music that they have that 4 on the floor kick. Well, they want that to be super punchy and nothing to really get in the way of that. So they'll have a compressor which will pull the overall signal down and then let it release, so that kick can really come through and not be super muddy. So if we keep that, again, this is just a dry wet. So let's turn on a pad. And see, it's just dry. And then I pull it. You can tailor it to how much you want and that kind of thing. So, again, that's only if that clip, if I would stop this and play it again, and I'm turning the side chain, you can see nothing's happening because nothing's being fed to make that pulsing effect. And then the last thing for the pads is the shimmer function. Now this gets into what this is called a return. These buses are being routed to these returns, and from this point is when it actually sends to your audio interface, or for here, the Dante virtual sound card. And that's all routed in this audio 2 external output, and then whatever channel you have. So at Greenfield, it's 1 through 8. So 1 is click, 2 is guide, 3 and 4 are kind of like percussion and effects, like sweeps and all that kind of stuff. 5 and 6 are keys tracks. And then the actual keys sounds that you're playing are coming from 7 and 8. At the other campuses, I think for most of them, for this, there we go. Here's all the outputs right here. These 2 are what's called monitor outputs, and that's actually affected by, where is it? This knob right here. So just for troubleshooting purposes, we're not using those 2, just in case, again, like hardware error or this would break, or someone accidentally puts it down and you're freaking out right before your service, and why is nothing working? So at the campuses, they should be starting at 3 and go click. This is 4, guide. Percussion, you can have these percussion, or some campuses will have this one, which is 3, 4, 5, 6. It will be like guitar stuff. And then 7 and 8 are the keys tracks. And then 9 and 10 are what is the actual key sounds coming from Ableton. So we'll put that back, and we'll go back to Ableton here. So the routing, these little knobs dictate which return is getting these sounds. So if you see on the pad, this last one right here, this says G. Does it say G? Yeah, it says G. And I'm gonna this last one for the pad is called shimmer, and see that's the only one moving. And that sends this audio signal to this return, which is hitting something called a grain delay. You don't need to know how it works, but it basically just every single delay, it actually bumps it up an octave, your signal. So there's a lot of settings, and this is set, so don't touch this. If it gets messed up, look at the template. Always save a template that is not being used, so you can go back and see the default settings to get things back into order. If you start messing with things and then you don't remember where it was. So this is set up specifically, so for the most part, don't touch it. And then this is being sent to this is the whole way up, so this never changes, and it's being sent to only send and to this reverb, and then I have it partially going back and forth, so it just can create a super cool shimmer effect, which I'll play right now. So that's so if you don't want that kind of there's a lot of mids and stuff, and then once you get that's where all the sort of shimmery bright stuff. If you don't want to go through all that, you can just pull a little bit of the actual shimmer, and you can see right here it's starting to the reverb starting to get affected and sending out. You can start hearing that kind of like high shimmery effect. If you want to go crazy, so the neat thing about this is your signal can get super big with both the pad tone mod, the mod wheel, which is what that is called, the pad tone, so the filter, and the shimmer. So I'm gonna just kind of hold this C out, and you can see how big your sound can just really fill up the room, which is good for if tracks aren't going, or you really want to just get huge wall of sound coming at the congregation. So we have that, and you're pulling this up. You can get there's a lot coming at, and then you can throw in your so if you're hitting a big moment and you're almost being a spontaneous moment, you can get your sound huge to really fill up the space instead of only relying on just that. This actually even takes it to a different level. So cool. So that's the shimmer. Again, rewatch this if that didn't make any sense to you at all. But it's again, rewatch it. It'll make sense over time. As the more you use it, I think a lot of us will learn really just hands-on. Get with your worship directors, tech people. Get in your campuses before rehearsal. Play with this stuff so you're very confident in how to use these things, and just play around. So the synth bus is the last bus we're going to talk about, and that's our synth. We have an auto filter that goes the whole way. So that's nice also. So if you wanted to kind of have a synth at certain parts, you can do a few various things. You can either bring your volume down, or you can do synth tone, because this sound isn't always like going all the time. Sometimes if you're hitting a big chorus and you wanted to do some synth over top of what you're doing, but that's the only time you want to do it, a lot of times doing this and pressing it off and all that, there's a lot of hand movements going on. So if your hand's already up here or even here, there's multiple ways to kind of take that out of your signal and then pull it back in super quick. And that's trying the efficiency of. So this synth reacts to. Usually, if you're doing a synth lead, if I hold the pedal over time, there's actually a slow decay. You can kind of hear it, so it's not a constant thing. It'll go out eventually. But if you keep hitting it, it'll build if you're holding the sustain pedal. So a lot of what I'll do is actually I'll just hold the sustain off and then just hold my bass note. For instance, I'll try to play This Is Living, which is this kind of sound. And then it goes down there. So so that's kind of the synth. You know, just pick and choose where you're going to use that. A lot of that stuff is usually in the tracks, but play with it. You know, take your next step in getting better at those kinds of things. There is only the synth tone to affect that. There is a already set reverb to it. It kind of just, there's no use to really put a ton of reverb on that. So this is set. If we feel like we want to change that up, we can always, you know, move some things around, and we can create this fader to be something. And it also has the compressor, which is pulling from this pads MIDI in. So it does the same thing. It does that pulsing effect. Okay, so that is, we went through all of this stuff. So a few things, some troubleshooting things is if you come up, again, if you're coming up and everything is on and you're playing and there's like this, there's nothing, you can see bars and stuff going, like the volumes going, but nothing's coming out. More than likely at the other campuses besides Greenfield, this thing was left on, and sometimes this loses connection with the computer because it was left on, and we close out Ableton and we open sometimes just because of connection. That's why I always want to, when you're done, shut off the interface after you have closed the programs out. So when you restart it, it reconnects every time, and we won't have that issue. So that's one thing we want to, again, make sure that that's happening. And if more, I would say 9 times out of 10, if something is really just acting wonky, just restart the programs. So what you want to do to shut down Ableton and Reason, what you do is just the reverse order in how you opened it. So if I go to close this out, it'll say there's a program using the rewire function, so it's not letting you quit Ableton. So if it says that, when you quit, you go to Reason, just Reason, quit Reason. That'll exit. We'll go back to live, and now you can exit Ableton. A lot of times, if you do that and then just restart everything, 9 times out of 10, that's, again, technology sometimes just doesn't like to play nice with each other. But we've been using this for almost a half a year, because we started in January at the Strasburg campus, and we've been having great success. Oops, I went the wrong thing. Great success with this, as long as you're doing the right procedures and shutting it down and opening it back up. We've had maybe one time it kind of froze up out of those 6 months. So it's a very stable program. Why is this not coming up? There we go. Get Reason back. Again, just log in. Keys template. This is set to always open the keys template. At least, well, it's set to open the last thing you had open. So this should always come up. If you doesn't, there's a hot folder on the left. You go to Desktop, Templates, Keys Template. And that's how you open if it didn't open to this. And we're going to go back to Ableton. So a few things just to make sure we are aware of these. This is something, I think for most things, there's a give and take. There's a lot of systems that have their little quirks. This has a few little quirks that we just need to be mindful of while we're playing on a Sunday. I want to start, did that start? Yeah, start the click, and I'm going to turn the click on. And say we're playing a song. If I turn all my stuff on here. playing, and then, oh no, we got off the click and we need to get off and that kind of thing. I'm holding it. I press the stop button and my signal dies. There's no way around it. Just make sure when there is a time, which I think for most of us it's pretty rare, there's a time when you have to bail on the tracks or anything. Just keys players, worship leaders, give a signal to your keys players saying that's going to happen, because if you hold this, hey, we got to stop, and always try to stop tracks on a downbeat. Try to push it to a different section so it's not so obvious. But give a signal, like create a signal, like, I don't know, do something with your hands that's saying, hey, we're bailing on this thing. So when you hit it, you just hit it again and your signal's back in and ready to go. That's why, you want to hit on a downbeat so it's not awkward you're hitting that stuff. It's a little quirk, that's something. So what you can kind of do to get around it is a little bit of, for right now, this is just how it is. So we have this, we're going. I'm going to start the click. Hopefully I MIDI mapped this correctly. So how do I do that? That's because the click is still running. I just turned off the click. So that's only if you're going to bail, you're going to bail. If you're hitting talking moments and you want the click to stop, turn the click off. Don't stop. Like, we should be not stopping unless we have to bail on tracks. There's in the loop to miss pedal. Let's see if this can come up here. Try to get my shadow out of the way. So usually we're on the one. Again, this is more for the worship leaders, but it's good to know for keys players. So if you know what's happening, you guys should map it like this. So if we're on page 1, this is the click. So we're hearing the click, and then we can hit that's starting the tracks. So we have the click going. If you hold this in for a couple seconds, it goes into all access mode. And this button now, I map to turn the click off. If you're ready to go, click this, click it back on, go to your next song. So that's a way to, or if you don't want to do all that and you're ready to kind of get into something, if you're, let me go back to the one. Oh, I turned it off. There we go. If you're in this song and then there's a speaking moment in between, you can turn this off. It'll always go back to the page that you were on. Go to the next one. You can start the next click. Now, this isn't mapped to the thing, but say we hit this, it started the next click. We're getting ready to go back in. Whoever's controlling this can start the click again. Go back to and be ready to start the tracks. So it's a way to stop your click without killing the keys signal. For right now, unless they come up with a better way, it's just the quirk that we have to work around. I'm always trying to find different ways to do those things. You can also well, I shouldn't. So there's a few other ways, but there's a lot of button pressing and that kind of thing. So for right now, just be aware that when you're going to bail on a track, again, I think it's pretty rare now for most campuses, make sure you're coming up with signals saying, hey, we're like bailing like this, or something with your hands. Come up with something. So when you're bailing, the keys player is ready to come right in and go to the next progression or wherever you're at. So that is a big thing. I'm trying every single day to find a workaround. No one in the community has yet within Ableton Standard. If we had Ableton Suite, we could get around it pretty easily, but that's another $300, $400. So per campus. So we're just going to deal with it. Jason said yes. And just a few, yeah. I think that's the biggest thing. Thinking about just really thinking that is the overall way the keys are going to be laid out. This is something that when we are using this at campuses, we're not going into Reason to change sounds. That is going to be coming from Tim. If we're going to implement a new pad or a new sound or a new instrument, that will be communicated to each campus through an email of the new template with instructions on how to link it in Ableton. So right now we're just going to keep it simple. 5 instruments. Most people just use the piano and pad, but explore. I didn't even hit the electric piano actually, but it works exactly the same as the piano. It's pulling from the same MIDI. Again, it's just the EP is right there. This is actually super hot, so we'll pull that down a little bit. So it acts exactly the same. So the tone is for the EP as well, and the verb. So you can get a kind of a cool pad effect, like it kind of comes and then it leaves. And so that works the same way. So again, just reiterate, when you want to use a sound, press the button so it's red. The keyboard should be set to preset right here. If it's on any of these options, there says mixer, instrument, and preset. If it's on mixer, it's sending different messages. It's not going to communicate with Ableton. It needs to be on preset to work. So that's another thing. Make sure that is on preset. And I think that's kind of about it of the full scope of where our keys are going. Right now, it's now set up for Greenfield. It's set up for Strasburg and Lidditz. Next week, we're going to hit Columbia, and then in the future, Corryville. We'll get it eventually. And then for all their campuses, they'll have this. We'll just implement this right away. So, any questions?
I had a question earlier. Is there any sort of, so you get up there and something wacky's going on with the delays or something and you don't have time. Is there just something you can hit to just cut all of the effects and go dry, or?
That is a great question. At this time, there is no panic button.
Okay.
So, but that's a good point, and that's why this is a first-time template. When people come up with those things, we'll research it. We'll implement it. I mean, that's a great thing to have.
Awesome.
For the most part, when we've been using. Another thing I actually forgot. Again, it's kind of the quirk, and I'm trying to work around it. If you would have a pad on and you pulled it out and I turned that pad off and I went to this next pad and we're starting another song. Let me just change keys. And I wanted to go to this pad and I'm going to pull this. Again, it's quirk, working at it. But just remember when we're, that's why just keep these on. Don't turn them off. Especially your pad kind of functions. The computer can handle all of them on. at once. If you know you're not going to use the EP, it's best to not just have it, because when everything's on, even though the fader is down, it's still sending MIDI to Reason. It's pulling the audio, but it's just not coming out the inputs. I mean the outputs. So that is just the workaround on that. So if you know for the most part you're going to do piano pad, you can have both pads. So when you're hitting these, and you pull that, you can easily pull up another pad and it's there. If you do that, say that's off, and then you turn this on. Oh, it kind of did. Sometimes it won't pull it up, but that time it did. But a lot of times, if you have an instrument off and you have a pad up, see how that didn't. That's not the pad that's on, but since I'm sustaining that one, it hasn't, because it was off, it didn't receive a signal. So just keep your piano and 2 pads on, so when you're playing, you can easily just pull something up. Again, it can handle all 5, but just turn off for, if you're not going to use a synth, you can just leave it off. But that's another little quirk we're working with. Again, for the past 6 months, at Strasberg, we've really only had one kind of mishap, and it's been super, super awesome to have this going on. Any more questions? If not, Tim's going to kind of work through a couple, like when to use certain things, when to pull, the pad tone up in certain situations. So we're going to shoot it over to him. He's a much player than I am. So here's Tim Ziegler.
And I'm shorter. So, I mean, you guys are pretty adept at doing your transitions and everything. So, obviously, Mark hit basically everything. I just kind of wanted to let me play through it in some more realistic situations. For the most part, yes, we have these 5 sounds right now. If there are suggestions for others, please let us know. But again, the tracks are handling so much of the quote-unquote weird stuff. I don't want your focus as well to be so far of like button pushing and knob pushing, and not everybody is wired that way. If you guys came from guitar backgrounds and then you're accustomed to doing all the tap dancing that's involved, that might be more of how your brain's wired. But again, I want you guys to be focused on hitting your transitions well. And so obviously pianos and pads are going to be key in that. That's not a real sustain pedal. Mark moved it back and forth. Okay, so obviously my piano tone is way down. So let's see that piano bus again. So I was like, why does it not sound like anything? It's because that piano bus was so yeah, that piano is pretty bright. You'll be able to mix in some verb. I would not, unless it's slower sections, mix too much of that verb in, because it's going to turn into a washy mess. I layer a lot of the pad in, not a lot, but enough to kind of create that wash behind it when I'm playing. And yes, I'm playing in the key of F. Enough just to kind of give it a little, especially in the worship sense. I mean, when I'm doing the faster songs, I'm pretty much pulling most of it out. So I'm using a little bit of verb there, but again, keep in mind of your role as in the band too, because piano, you're able to cover all this area. I just think it's funny to see my hands go back and forth. But keep in mind of what the guitars are doing, what the bass is doing. I always make the joke about if y'all are familiar with Southern Gospel much. I mean, the Southern Gospel piano player had to do everything. And so be careful of that kind of movement, that you're treading on somebody else's territory because you have the full frequency spectrum. Try to carve out where it works best for you. Now, that's not as much of training for reason. That's just what the job of the keyboard player. So again, like Mark said, be careful of the delays because that's going to become washy. Click in there. There's a quarter note. Is still on, which is kind of cool. So you're getting that one repeat. And again, we didn't touch on that, but layering some of the delays is nice, especially the quarter and the dotted eighth. That's like the U2 sound. So you can do stuff like that. I'm not doing a whole lot of movement. I'm creating the pad-ish sound by adding those delays in there. Probably a little too much feedback on that, but wanted to kind of accentuate it with the mix and everything. As far as I use a lot when I've used this at Strasbourg. I go back and forth between the pads, and yes, I keep piano and then the two pads up at all time. I'm used to dancing around a little bit, so it's fine for me. I'm probably going to edit this sound. It's a little too dark for I like a little bit more of an attack, especially in my EP. It gives you a good attack when you dig into it. I prefer to have a little bit more drive on it. Which it doesn't have right now. So we'll probably need to edit that, Mark. Now, we're not doing most of that either. But, it's good to have the options. So that's adding all kinds of stuff in there. Verb, delay, and yeah. Now, keep in mind the shimmer only works for the pads, correct, Mark? That's on the pad. That's on the pad bus. Because I forget to turn it off. That's what happened to me at Strasbourg. I forgot to turn it off. All right? That's really, Mark, you hit most of it. I just kind of want to run through a couple scenarios where what I personally would do. Questions? Again, I think this actually makes things a little bit easier. You do have less options, but you have more capabilities to change what's right here in front of you to create the textures and the landscapes which affect your band landscape where you're at your campus. So no, it is not as comprehensive. Yes, we can add more things. We probably will add an organ, and we do have two other options. It might have two different EPs. That's more of a road sound. I'd like a little bit more of a harsher, grindy whirly for myself. Just because I used to own one, and I'm accustomed to that. So, but please, this is something that we can talk about and give us your perspective as you guys are playing through this. It's pretty simple for me. I try to focus on more of the playing side. Mark is great with what comes here to the Ableton side, the busing and everything. But it is good to know if you guys are in a jam to kind of know what it's doing and why it's doing it. So there we have it. Questions?
What do you think the role of the keyboard player is, like, within the band?
Within the band? This is not really part of the training, but we can. But I'm happy to talk about it. Number one, filling the space, because I personally don't like the dead air, and that's why I tell filter down to all the campuses. We need to fill the space so that, number one, it supports the speaker, because that's the biggest part, whether it is the campus pastor or the host or here at Greenfield if it's PC, to provide that undercurrent. It's like the movement of the ocean. You know, I personally, when I'm back here and I'm with PC, I'm feeling where he's at in the moment, helping either create that momentum that's behind him. If he's ramping things up, I'm ramping up too. So it is really providing that space filling to make the speaker feel comfortable and make the audience feel comfortable. Because when there's so much dead air, it can provide that, like, those awkward silences and just helping make people feel more comfortable in the moment, creating the atmosphere. And obviously, as a keyboard player, there's so many different options for you to be able to do that. So that's the biggest thing. Guys, anything else? Brian, is there anything that we're missing? All right. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. Start playing around with stuff. I'm a fiddler in multiple perspectives because I'm a violinist. But I just come in, like, for rehearsals and everything. I'm just kind of playing around with stuff. What can I do? The biggest thing that I learned this past week, actually with Adam, is kind of keep some of these things, keep your master full up. And then I use that, like, when I come up, I have it here. I set my volumes, and so I'm swelling it at the end of the message or whatever. Hit my chord. You know, this thing is very responsive too. These keyboards are, even though they're on the cheaper end of the spectrum, but it will pick up your attack very easily. I can barely hit it. I have piano full up here. You can't hear a thing that I'm doing because I'm just kind of finessing it in. So all I have to do is use your touch. You're self-mixing yourself at that point. This doesn't have, like, aftertouch. There's keyboards that they tried to, like, I think the Kronos actually does and the Motif does. They have all those aftertouch, so you could hit a chord and then you could hit harder, and it would, like, engage some of, like, that you could do. I think it's a little cheesy. I mean, it has its place, but it made it like double the cost just to be able to do that, and it's not worth it. But it's very touch sensitive. Yeah. Good. Cut.